Hello all of you beautiful Hive scum, and welcome to another Astromax video. This one's going to be part 2 of our discussion on Genestealer Cult datasheets. So we're going to be looking at the top 11 datasheets in this codex. This loose ranking structure I've put on these datasheets is based on the datasheets raw, not really taking into account relics, traits, or cult creeds that you can equip them with. So it's helpful to look at datasheets in the matched play perspective because you're building it for a tournament setting, and because of that you have to be able to deal with any opponent that could come at you with any kind of list. So we really look at what's going to have the most versatility to it, particularly when we're looking at the top 5 datasheets in this codex. Alright, that's it for the preamble. Let's overload our fuel cells. Our time is nigh. The Day of Ascension starts right now. Alright, so we left off in the last video with the Sanctus coming in at number 12, and we'll start this video still in the elite section of this book and still looking at individual characters. Before we get to them, let's just quickly talk about a few things, because there's a lot of characters in this book, and it can be very easy to just take all of the characters because they all have some pretty fun, cool things that they can contribute to your army. But we want to be careful that we're not taking too many characters for 2 simple reasons. The first reason is we don't want to be a sitting target for Assassinate. There's a lot you can do with the Unquestioning Loyalty, special rules mechanic, and a few other things to protect yourself from Assassinate. But the more characters you add into your army list, the more susceptible you become to that. So that's rule number 1, why we want to be mindful of not taking every character in this codex, even though they're all cool. The second thing is we don't want to overload our neural synapses, right? We want to overload the fuel cells, not our brains. All of these characters come with beautiful and fluffy abilities. Some of them are very strong, and the more, especially, as we're learning this codex and as we're putting together our first lists and playing our first games and especially going to our first tournament, the more information you're forcing yourself to try and remember, the more sequences you're trying to remember every single turn. By the second day or the third game of the first day, the mental fatigue is going to be a real thing, and your play is going to start getting sloppier, and you're not going to be as agile with your list because you're trying to remember so many strict sequences of do this, do this, do this, do this, and then this result. You want to have some fluidity in your play. You want to have some agility in your play. You want to stay nice and relax with it. So fewer characters, but knowing exactly why those characters are in our list is something that is going to help the first, 20 or so games. The grading rubric that we're using for this is 3 simple questions. They're not set in stone by any means. It was just something I wanted to throw together, so I wasn't just reading, here's the HQ section, here's the troop section, yada, yada, yada. Boring. So I want to put together some kind of, evaluation system for this. So I just asked myself 3 questions anytime I look at a data sheet, and this can be for any codex, right? The first question I'm going to ask myself is, how well does this unit stand on its own? Is it something that really needs a lot of support from the rest of my army, or is it something that I can realistically expect it to go off all on its own without any sort of support from the rest of the army and do and accomplish something? The second question we're asking ourselves when we look at all these data sheets is, what is this unit really trying to do? What is its function in this army? This is something that is going to change from player to player and from list to list, depending on all of the other choices you've made up to this point. But just be aware that when you're picking a unit and you're spending the points on it, you want to have a clear idea of what its use is going to be. The third question we have to ask ourselves when we're evaluating these data sheets is there a better way to achieve the same results? Is there a more point efficient way to do it, or is there some other mechanic in the codex that allows us to get the same result? Okay, I hope that level set everything that was going on and how the lens that I'm looking at these data sheets through. All right, coming in at number 11 on our data sheets, we're talking about the Biophagus. Now, the Biophagus is an excellent model. Both, physically, it's just a cool looking model, but also it does a lot of things to really help this army. So when we look at the first question, does it stand on its own? Yeah, the genomic enhancement ability without the proficient planning upgrade you can give to it, or without the Alchemist Familiar, just all on its own, really cool. Called genomic enhancement, and it gives you an action that you can perform, and the action is called Twisted Experiment. At the end of your movement phase, one Biophagus model from your army can start to perform this action. When this action is started, select one friendly cult core or cult aberrance unit that is within 3 inches of the model performing this action and does not have a genomic enhancement. This action is completed at the end of your shooting phase, provided the unit you selected is still within 3 inches of the Biophagus model performing this action. If this action is successfully completed, the unit you selected gains 1 genomic enhancement from the list below for the rest of the battle. If that unit is an aberrance unit, you can select which genomic enhancement it gains. Otherwise, roll 1d3 to randomly generate one. Enhanced Musculature, which is going to improve the armor penetration of melee attacks by 1. Enhanced Aggression, which is going to give you exploding 6s in melee. Or Enhanced Resilience, which is going to give you a 5+ Feel No Pain. Those are all really handy to have. Pieces of equipment, quote unquote, that you can give the Biophagus to really boost him up. The first one is you can give him the Alchemist Familiar. And this is going to allow you to select a unit within 18 inches of the Biophagus instead of 3 inches. And then also there's a Proficient Planning, Alchemist Supreme. We talked about that in the Proficient Planning video. There's a card for it. With the Alchemist Supreme and the Alchemist Familiar upgrades, the versatility of the Biophagus goes up. And I almost think that those two are mandatory things to equip on the Biophagus, just so that you can pick a unit that isn't an aberrant at the beginning of the game and select a genomic enhancement for it. And I said this in the Proficient Planning video. I'm going to say it again now. I have almost always found it to be extremely helpful to take a 20-man blob of Neophytes, put the 5+ Feel No Pain on them, put Lying in Wait on that unit, and pop it up somewhere down the board. Moving right along with the characters, up next we have the Magus coming in at number 10. So we've reached the top 10, and the Magus is 10 on this list. Now, like I've said for almost all of these characters, depending on what you're trying to build specifically for, the value of the Magus could go way up or way down. If you want to do a psychic heavy build, so you're taking, then you have 2 psychic character options, right? And you're going to take a Magus and you're going to take a Patriarch. That said, the Magus is going to give you a few nice bonuses. It opens up some secondary scoring for you with like Psychic Interrogation, a Warp Ritual. As we discussed in the Broodmind Discipline episode, the Broodmind Discipline is really nice, and there are also a lot of very powerful psychic abilities locked to specific cult subfactions. So depending on how the rest of your list is building out, a Magus might be a crucial thing to have. Coming in at number 9 is the big boy in the army, the Goliath Rockgrinder. Now, the Goliath Rock Truck was in the previous video. It's down a few more notches, but the Rockgrinder is number 9 in this codex because it does a few things that nothing else in this army can do, and it also brings with it one of the only other place for a strength 8 AP-3 3 damage weapon, and that's the heavy seismic cannon. This is where the heavy versions of your mining laser, your seismic cannon, and your incinerator are going to be. The clearance incinerator, the heavy version of it, I've never used here. I've only ever used the version that's on the Wolf Quads. I've tried the heavy mining laser. My same issue is the same way that it is on the Ridge Runners. It's really swingy. Even though the Goliath Rockgrinder is core, you can get rerolls for it. My Primus usually is not around it. So I personally think the best weapon for it is the seismic cannon. Who knows if that's going to be true in the next edition. So coming up very shortly, we're going to look at magnetizing for everyone who's like rebuilding an army like myself or building Genestealers for the first time. So we're going to look at some ways to do some magnets to get the most out of some of these models. And the Rockgrinder is a really easy one to magnetize. Okay, we're back to characters, but we're going to jump back to the HQ section of the codex for this next one, and that is going to be the Acolyte Iconward. Like a great many characters in this book, the Iconward falls down the boards a little bit because it doesn't have Crossfire natively, and therefore really needs, once again, the Oppressor's Bane to lift it up almost every time. I've found it to be worthwhile just having the Iconward, even without the Crossfire. The Nexus of Devotion and the Sacred Banner are awesome. If you take them just for these two things and don't worry about the Oppressor's Bane and Crossfire, you're still going to get some value out of this unit. Between being the cheapest HQ choice in your book and those two abilities, it's hard not to take an Iconward. Okay, coming in at number 7 on this list, it is not a character. We're talking about the Purestrain Genestealers, the ones that started all the true Tyranids of this army. I love Purestrains. On base raw datasheet alone, they bring a lot to the table. They're fast, and they have a high number of attacks. They have a 4+ invulnerable save, which makes them durable as far as this army goes. And then when we look at the proficient planning chart, there's 3 really easy choices to put on your Purestrains. You can get a pregame move on them. You can get a +1 attack on them. You can get 3d6 and drop the lowest charge on them. So there's a lot of different tech options in this codex that boost them up. But even if you do none of those things, even if you just run 10 of them as they are, still a good unit. They're infantry, so they can do some actions too. Just saying. We're talking about the Primus. He's number 6 because his datasheet is middling at best. He's not a ranged threat. He's not a melee threat. He's super squishy. Dies all the time. I don't think the lore and the datasheet really line up on this guy. He's an auto, even though he's 6, he's still an auto include on every list because he's where you reroll 1s to hit lives, and that's an aura, so that's just on anyone around him. And then also Meticulous Planner is you pick a unit. I don't know that there's much else to say about the Primus other than, those 2 abilities mean you're going to want to use him. There's a lot of other units he synergizes really, really well with, and a couple of those are coming up. So let's just keep rolling on into the top 5. You could take these 5 units and put them in any order in the top 5 you wanted to. All right, coming in at number 5, we have Acolytes. One of 2 troop options in this book, and this is going to be the melee version. Versatility is just the bee's knees in Warhammer and in life, right? So a unit like Acolytes that you can equip in a bunch of different ways is super useful. And one of my favorite things about 9th edition has actually been the evolution of the Acolyte as the edition has gone on, and listening and reading and watching and thinking about, and even my own playing, all the different ways you can utilize Acolytes. Big 15-man blobs with 6 heavy weapons that are just going to go out and hunt the biggest, baddest thing on the board, to small 5-man bare-bone squads that are just going to pop up to set up exposed or retrieve battlefield data or some other kind of action. Acolytes do all of it. Number 4 on the list. This one might get me in trouble because I think a lot of people are going to want it to be number 1, and I would have no problem with that. And the only reason it's number 4 on my list is because to truly be number 1, he needs his relic pistols. Well, the relic bullets up to 12 shots is great. The ability to move and shoot is great. The ability to support other units around him is really clever. He's a decent sniper. There's so many things that the Kelermorph can do for your army. But he's 4 because Wormtooth rounds really makes this unit hum. Number 3 on the list is the Nexus. Since this codex came out, I have been running a Nexus in every single list and game I've ever done. I never leave home. It's my one super auto. He's infinitely better with his relic. So just keep that in mind. Be mindful and have a plan every turn of when your Nexus is going to come in. Is he going to start on the board? Is he going to come in from underground? Because there's some rules interactions there and some sequencing of things that you're going to want to keep in mind. And also keep in mind the number of times he can do it. But take a Nexus, take the cranial inlay for him. You'll have a good time. Is it going to be the Jackals? Is it going to be the Neophytes? Honestly, like I said, I would go along with any argument for however you wanted to rate these last 5 units. But I have the Neophytes in at number 2 because they're not quite as versatile as the Jackals. So things that I love about the Neophytes. 1, 20-man blobs with a lot of weapons. They get D6 models back in Summon the Cult, which is really nice. A bunch of different proficient planning upgrades you can put on them. Currently, my two favorite combinations, my favorite combination and then something I've been experimenting with on Neophytes. Both of these are going to be 20-man blobs. So my favorite combination is a 20-man blob, and then we're going to put the Alchemist Supreme 5-up Feel No Pain on them. We're going to put Lying in Wait on them. They're going to have seismic cannons. They're going to have Webbers or grenades. I like both of those. And they're going to have a cult icon to do summoning the cult, and they're going to go off somewhere and score me Brood Swarm for, my opponent's deployment zone, hopefully. As I've mentioned throughout this, learning Genestealer Cult series that we've done, I don't love mining lasers. D6 damage is just way too swingy for something I'm going to spend that kind of points on. But in Neophytes, they're not bad because at least you have ready access to reroll hit rolls of 1 from your Primus. However, things like Treat as Exposed and Exposed that give you pretty ready access to +1 to wound means that the Seismic Cannon is going to do most of the same things that the Mining Laser can do. Exploding 6s on Mining Lasers is actually pretty fun, and I had it come up in a battle in a game I was playing last week where I rolled 4... I had 4 mining lasers in the squad, right? And I rolled 3 6s on those 4 dice. So I almost doubled the number of hits. Now, that isn't likely to happen every time, but even if you spike a couple of 6s once or twice in a game, that really increases the damage output. And then definitely what I like to do when that unit is shooting, unless I have a better option somewhere, that's where I really like to put my Overload the Fuel Cells, just so that at least those mining lasers are D6 +1 damage. Because there's nothing worse than being like, 4 mining lasers hit, and I rolled a 1, and a 1, and a 2, and another 1, and that's like, ugh. It's the worst feeling in the world. Last on our list, probably surprising nobody, hopefully surprising nobody, but we're talking about the Atalan Jackals. They win because they're the coolest model in the book. No, I'm just kidding. They win because of the most versatile model unit in this book. If you're asking yourself, what do I need? The Jackals are probably going to fill that role. Do you need something fast? Check. Do you need something that can sit on an objective? Check. Do you need something that can soak up a decent amount of enemy firepower? Check. Do you need something that can screen? Check. I like to run 2 big squads. So full 10-man squads, 8 bikes, and 2 wolf quads. They come in with the demolition charges like 190 to 200 points, something like that, depending on how many demo charges you want to have. I never leave home with fewer than 2. And sometimes I take 3 on my squads just because sometimes they live long enough to use all 3. I use the incinerator over the mining laser. So that's another great place to do overload the fuel cells. Whatever scenario I find myself in on a particular turn, usually a squad of jackals can bail me out of it. The ability to resurrect the bikes using the Iconward is why I always recommend taking the wolf quad, because it's 4 wounds, right? So it's 4 wounds that resurrect on 1 roll, because the weapons it's equipped with don't really do much, but if it can just absorb damage for the rest of the squad, it's earning its points. That's going to wrap this video. Thank you so much for watching. This was part 2 of the data sheets. So we've now gone through everything in this codex, which has been awesome. Thanks for coming along for that experience. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Give it a like, give it a subscribe, ring the bell for notifications so that you know when the next episode comes out. And until then, geek your own way.